The patience of the pious predecessors in seeking knowledge. Chapter 6. Stories of the reaction of the scholars upon losing their books, selling them at the time of their hardships, and buying them at the expense of selling their clothes. Books in the life of a scholar are like just how a soul is to the body. You will be amazed in the upcoming stories of their state upon their books being lost or burnt. Judge and Imam Abdullah ibn Lahiyah rahimahullah, timeline, died in the year 174 Hijri. Lesson. The judge of Egypt and a scholar and Imam in the field of Hadith and a great memorizer. He became distressed when his books were burnt in the year 169 Hijri. As a result of this incident, he made a lot of errors and did tadlis, an act of dropping a narrator in the chain of Hadith when narrating a Hadith. That's why those Hadith that were taken from him before his books were burnt are stronger in their authenticity than those that were taken after his books were burnt. When his books were burnt, Imam Layth ibn Sa'ad Misri sent him 1,000 dinars, hoping this money may reduce his calamity on the loss of his books. Abu Ayyub Sulaiman ibn Dawood al-Shazkuni rahimallah. Here is another story, which will give you a picture of the sacrificing of a scholar for his books. These books were as though they were a part of their flesh and blood. These stories will show you the value of the books in their sight and their strong dedication in looking after their books. Timeline. Died in Asbahan in the year 234 Hijri. Lesson. He was amongst the great scholars and was seen after he died in a dream. He was asked, "How did Allah deal with you?" He said, "He forgave me." He was asked, "Why?" He said, "Once I was on my way to Asbahan and it started to rain and I was carrying my books with me and I was not under a roof or any canopy. So I took care of my books and protected them from rain until the rain had calmed down. So Allah forgave me as a result of this good deed." Imam Ali ibn Madini rahimallah, timeline, died in the year 234 Hijri. Teacher of Imam Bukhari. Lesson. An Imam of the scholars of Hadith. He authored a book called Al-Musnad, with a lot of time spent writing this book. Then he made a lengthy journey around the Muslim countries for 3 years. When he returned back to his hometown, he saw that the book he had written down had been rotten and decayed. The book had died in the life of its author. Imam Abu Ali al-Farisi al-Fasawi, rahimallah. Timeline. Died in the year 377 Hijri. Lesson. The most knowledgeable in his time in the Arabic language, Uthman ibn Jini, says, "Our teacher Abu Ali told us that once there was a fire in the city of As-Salam, a suburb in Baghdad. This caused a great amount of knowledge of the scholars of Basra being lost." He says, "All this knowledge I wrote it with my own hands, and I read them on our colleagues. In the same container that got burnt, all the books burnt except for the half section of the Book of Divorce, narrated by Muhammad ibn al-Hasan." I asked him how he reacted to this incident, and he looked at me amazed and said, "For 2 months I did not speak with anyone due to grief and sadness." He said, "I went to Basra because my mind was affected, and I remained distracted for a long period of time." Muhammad ibn al-Husayn ibn Musa al-Alawi al-Talibi, rahimallah, timeline, died in the year 406 Hijri. Lesson. He was amongst the honored, knowledgeable, and intelligent people. Some parts of his collection of knowledge was stolen on the way to Faris. This incident made him extremely hurt and heartbroken. Later on, after he died, the collection was found in the city of Asbahan. Imam Ghazali, rahimallah, timeline, died in the year 505 Hijri. Lesson. Imam Asad al-Mihani says, "I heard Imam Ghazali say, 'Once we were robbed on the way, and the thieves stole everything that we had. So I followed them. So the leader of the gang turned towards me and said, "Go back or your life is in danger." So I said to them, "Before I go, I request you to return just one thing for me, that is hanging, referring to a book, as that will not be of any benefit to you. He asked me, What is that thing which is hanging? So I said, Those books that are in that bag. I migrated from my home city to seek knowledge, and I wrote it in those books. So the thief made a mockery of it and laughed. However, he ordered his gang to hand over the bag to me. Imam Ghazali said, As soon as I got to Tus, a name of a city, I was busy for 3 years memorizing everything that I gathered in these books, and I memorized it so well that if another incident occurred where I got robbed and these books were stolen, I wouldn't be deprived of this knowledge. Imam Ibrahim al-Harbi, rahimallah, timeline, died in the year 285 Hijri. Lesson: He was an Imam in knowledge, a memorizer of the Hadith, very knowledgeable in jurisprudence, author of the book Qarib al-Hadith, and many other books. Ibrahim al-Harbi says, I lived 30 years of my life on 2 slices of bread a day. If my wife or sister brought it for me, I would eat it, otherwise I would remain hungry and thirsty till the following day. Ahmed ibn Salman al-Najad al-Qati says, Living became very difficult for me, so I went to Ibrahim al-Harbi to tell him of what I was going through. So he reminded me of asking Allah's help and said, My living too became difficult for me until there was no food left in my house for my family. So my wife said to me one day, You and I can be patient, but what are we to do with our 2 children? They won't be able to be patient. So either sell your books or allow people to borrow them until Allah increases our livelihood. So I said to her, Give some of these books on loan and allow me a day to sort out this financial difficulty that we are going through. He says, I was sitting and engaged in reading my books, and suddenly someone knocked on my door. Upon asking who is at the door, he replied, One of your neighbours. I gave him permission to enter. He said, Blow out the lantern and only then I will enter. So I covered the lantern with a cloth and I asked him to enter. He entered the hall carrying some food in his hands and placed a big bag on the floor and said, We cooked some food for our children, so we wanted to keep a share for your children too. Pointing at the big bag, he said, Spend what is in here on your needs. Ibrahim al-Harbi says, I didn't know who the man was. He left my house and went back. I called my wife and asked her to firstly light the lantern. So she did, and she saw that in the bag of food there was around 50 different types of food, and next to it was a bag which contained 1,000 dinar. So I said to my wife, Feed your children, and tomorrow we will pay off our debts that we have on us. He says, The next day I was sitting on my doorstep, and there was a camel rider on my street, riding 2 camels. He is asking people where the house of Ibrahim al-Harbi is. People pointed him to my house. When he reached outside my house, I said to him, I am Ibrahim al-Harbi. He says, These 2 camels are being given to you from a man from Khorasan. I asked him, Who is this man from Khorasan? So he said, The one who gifted this to you has asked me to take an oath not to tell you who I am. Ibrahim says, So I took these camels from him, and I made dua for the one bringing it and for the one sending it to me. Ibn Dahan al-Nahwi al-Baghdadi, rahimallah. Timeline, died in the year 569 Hijri. Lesson: He was a scholar in the Arabic grammar. He authored many books in this field. Then he left for Baghdad and travelled to Mosul to meet Wazir Jamaluddin Asbahani. So he honored him as soon as he greeted him, and he remained in the city of Mosul for a long period of time. He left his books in Baghdad, and during that year the city was struck by flood. Some people went there to see if the books were safe, and they found that they were ruined. The entire collection of the books were damaged due to floods. He spent his entire life in collecting these books. When he was informed of this incident, he ordered the place to be scented with fragrance and repair whatever was possible to repair. So they perfumed the place with 30 pounds of medicine. This medicine affected his eyes, and he later lost his eyesight because of this incident. Imam Abul Faraj ibn Jawzi, rahimallah. Timeline. Died in the year 597 Hijri. Lesson. Imam Abul Faraj ibn Jawzi says, when Baghdad was flooded in the year 554 Hijri, my books got damaged and only one book remained safe. In this book were 2 pages of the writing of Imam Ahmed. Jamaluddin Abul Hassan Ali ibn Yusuf al-Qifti al-Misri from al-Halabi, rahimallah. Timeline. Died in Aleppo in the year 646 Hijri. Lesson. He was a great scholar and a judge. When he came to Aleppo and chose to reside here, he strived in collecting books and gathering books from faraway countries. He became well known in the world because of his love for books. Booksellers would visit him from every corner of the globe until his collection of books became a unique library, nowhere to be equaled. He spent his life taking care and looking after his unique library. His house in Aleppo became a place where scholars would make frequent visits to benefit from this unique collection of resources. Yaqut al-Hamawi says, I did not find anyone who was more eager in collecting books than the judge Qifti. No one collected as much as he did, and he lived in Aleppo. He gathered so many books that were unique and were found only in his library. He did not have the desire for any worldly things. He had no house, neither was he married. The value of his books was around 50,000 dinar. Sheikh Abdul Fattah says, I calculated the amount, 50,000 dinar, which equals to around 10 million Saudi riyals. I calculated the amount, 10 million Saudi riyals, and it equals to around 2 million UK British pounds. Abu Tahir Muhammad ibn Yaqub al-Fayruzabadi, rahimallah. Timeline. Died in the year 817 Hijri. Lesson. A great scholar of his time, a judge, Abu Tahir Muhammad ibn Yaqub ibn Muhammad al-Shirazi al-Fayruzabadi, a scholar of hadith, a scholar of tafsir, a historian, the judge of Yemen. He finished memorizing Quran at the age of 7. He was a very fast memorizer. He used to say, I don't sleep until I have memorized 200 lines. He moved to Shiraz when he was only 8 years old, and he studied with his father and Abdullah ibn Mahmud and other scholars from the scholars of Shiraz. Then he moved to Iraq and traveled to Wasit and Baghdad. He then traveled to Rome, India, and Egypt, and studied from the scholars there. He met a large number of scholars, and he took a lot of knowledge from them. He would never travel except carrying a large number of books with him, and at every stopping place he would take out a book and read it. He had a lot of unique and valuable books, but he used to spend a lot of money buying them. This is why he never had money nor any savings. When he became poor, he would sell his books. Sheikh Ahmed ibn Qasim al-Hajar, rahimallah, timeline, died in the year 1278 Hijri. Lesson. Sheikh Ahmed ibn Qasim al-Hajar, a scholar in the Hanafi school of thought, had some amazing stories on how he collected books. At the time of his death, the value of his library was in the region of 40,000 dirhams. He was so eager in collecting books that once he saw a book being sold and he had no dirhams with him, he took part of his clothes, excluding those covering the parts that is compulsory to cover, and he sold his clothes and bought the book straight away. Sheikh Abdul Fattah Abu Ghuddah rahimahullah. Timeline. Died in the year 1417 Hijri. Lesson. He says, when I was a student, I was poor, just like many students. I used to buy books, even though I was struggling to live on the money that I used to get. So I would buy the books with the amounts that I had immediately, or I would try to borrow the books when that was possible. A day came when some rare books were offered to me, and I had a great desire to buy them. But I was in extreme poverty. My heart was broken from letting these books go without buying them. So I went to the market and sold my scarf which I inherited from my father, and I purchased the books. This action of mine gave comfort to my heart and soul. I became so happy owning these books that the pleasure of owning them made me forget the scarf that I inherited from my father. Where do we find such students nowadays, except for those whom Allah has blessed? Today, students don't mind spending money on mobile phones, games, and other worldly items. But when it comes to buying books, which will bring them close to Allah, a means of reward in this life and the next, they bring hundreds of excuses. Then, when they complete their 6 or 7 year course of Islamic studies, they are given the title of Alim or Mulana, but they may have only bought 2 or 3 books in their life as a student, and even these purchased books were probably a great burden on their shoulders in buying. Humble student. When I was a student, studying in Darul Uloom, I was in my 3rd year Alim class. I was studying a book called Mukhtarat min Adab al-Arab, written by Sheikh Abul Hassan Ali Nadawi. The book contains selections from Arabic literature, both classic and contemporary. Sheikh Ali Tantawi, the scholar from Syria, declared it to be the best book of Mukhtarat. The graceful text, magnificent style, and rich vocabulary gave this book a unique character and flavour. Due to its rich vocabulary and difficulty in its translation, I translated a large portion of this book from Arabic to Urdu with the help of some of my teachers. A few months later, one of my sisters wanted to benefit from this translation. After I gave it to her, I don't recall getting this translation back from her. The book is still missing, and I become upset every time I think about losing it. I had the intention of completing the translation of it for the benefit of others, but Allah decrees what He wills. May Allah reward me for my good intentions and exchange this calamity with something better for me. Ameen. We belong to Allah, and to Him shall we return. O Allah, reward me for my affliction and give me something better than it in exchange for it.